The room was packed, but the silence was louder than any argument. Fluorescent lights buzzed above the HOA conference table, bouncing off the polished wood where Franklin Hale sat, smug, self-satisfied, and utterly certain he was right. He had just repeated his complaint. Voice sharp as glass, those flashing devices on your kids' ears are disruptive. This is a community space, not a disco. A few neighbors chuckled awkwardly. Others looked away. My son Noah sat beside me, small, fragile, his little fingers clinging to the edge of his chair. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could see the cruelty on Franklin's face. I stood slowly. My heart was steady. No anger, no shouting, just quiet precision. From my pocket, I pulled the audiologist's certificate and laid it on the table. Those flashing devices are medical hearing aids, I said. The light isn't decoration, and it's confirmation that he can hear you. The room shifted. Murmurs rippled through the board members. Franklin's smirk faltered, but I wasn't finished. I turned to him, meeting his eyes. You complained about the light, I said softly, but that light was the only sound my boy ever knew. For a moment, even the buzzing overhead stopped. The man who mocked a child's miracle finally met the weight of silence he'd created. Before all of this, before the whispers, the meetings, and the shame, our world was beautifully ordinary. I used to wake up to the soft rhythm of coffee brewing and the quiet hum of Grace's laptop keys from the kitchen table. She's my wife, steady, creative, the kind of woman who believes every problem has a patient solution. Our son Noah is 7. He was born with profound hearing loss, and for the first 3 years of his life, our house was full of silent milestones. First smile, first steps, first laugh that we only saw. When the audiologist finally fitted him with the new hearing aids, the ones that blinked gently every few seconds to signal they were active, Noah's world opened. Like dawn breaking after a lifetime of darkness, he called them his super ears. He'd grin every time they blinked blue, saying, "Look, Dad, they're talking to me." We moved to Maplewood Estates a year later, a clean, organized neighborhood of white fences and friendly reminders. I liked the order at first. Trimmed lawns, clear sidewalks, neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. The HOA promised community harmony. Our evenings were simple. Grace painted sunsets while Noah played catch with the neighbors' kids. I grilled on weekends. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, peaceful, until small glances began to shift. I noticed Franklin Hale, mid-50s, golf shirts, HOA clipboard always in hand, watching Noah from his porch. The first time I thought nothing of it. The second time, his expression hardened as Noah's hearing aids blinked in the dusk. That night, Grace asked quietly, "Did you notice how he stared at Noah's ears?" I laughed it off, saying, "Maybe he's just curious." I wish I had taken that as a warning, because in neighborhoods like ours, cruelty never begins with a scream. It begins with a look. And soon, those looks would turn into words that would break something sacred in our quiet little world. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. One of those golden, picture-perfect days when you'd swear nothing bad could ever happen. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and grilled burgers drifting from the park. Noah was playing on the swings, laughing, his hearing aids blinking gently in the sunlight. I was chatting with Grace near the picnic tables when I heard it. A voice sharp enough to slice through the hum of the weekend crowd. "Hey, could someone tell that kid to turn those flashing things off? They're blinding." The words came from Franklin Hale, standing by the water fountain, hands on hips, red polo tucked into his khakis like armor. A few parents turned their heads. Some laughed awkwardly. Others just stared. Grace froze beside me, her face draining of color. Noah looked confused, his swing slowing to a stop. He turned to me, blinking rapidly, uncertain if he'd done something wrong. I started walking toward Franklin, slow, calm. "They're hearing aids," I said evenly. The light lets him know they're working. "It's not a toy," Franklin snorted. "Then maybe they shouldn't be so distracting. This is a public park. There are standards here, standards." That word hung in the air like a stain. Grace spoke softly, pleading. "He's a child, Mr. Hale. Those devices help him hear." He waved her off. Then he can wear them at home. We're not trying to run a light show here, people murmured. Someone whispered, "That's too far." But no one stepped forward. I felt heat rise in my chest, not the heat of anger, but of injustice pressing for air. Still, I said nothing more. I guided Noah back to our car while Grace packed our things. My boy's eyes glistened as he whispered, "Did I do something bad, Dad?" That question cut deeper than Franklin's words ever could. 2 days later, a white envelope appeared in our mailbox. Stamped with the Maplewood HOA seal, it read, "Notice of non-compliance, cease use of flashing electronic devices in common areas. Violation of neighborhood aesthetic guidelines." I reread it 3 times, disbelief mixing with an old, familiar pain. The kind that comes when you realize people can still choose ignorance over humanity. Grace cried that night. Noah didn't want to wear his hearing aids to school the next day. That was when I knew silence wasn't peace. It was permission. I promised myself quietly, "You can humiliate me, but not him. Not ever again." And as I folded that letter and placed it in my desk drawer, I knew this fight wasn't about blinking lights anymore. It was about what kind of world my son would grow up in. One that looked away, or one that finally learned to listen. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat by Noah's door watching the faint blue light from his hearing aids pulse in the darkness, slow, rhythmic, alive. Every blink felt like a heartbeat. A tiny reminder that the world had finally opened for him, and now someone wanted to take that away. Grace was quiet beside me. She'd cried earlier, her hands trembling as she folded the HOA letter and placed it in the kitchen drawer like a wound she couldn't look at again. "They made him feel ashamed," she whispered. "How do people do that to a child?" I didn't have an answer. I just kept staring at that little light. I remembered the day Noah first heard my voice. The hospital room, the soft hum of machines, the moment his eyes widened when I said his name. That same light blinked then, too. He had reached out, small fingers touching my cheek, like he was saying, "So this is what you sound like." Now that same miracle had become a target. I could have stormed into Franklin's house. I could have yelled, filed complaints, shouted through the neighborhood, but that would have just made more noise. Instead, I chose silence, the kind that studies, listens, remembers. I went to my desk, opened a new folder on my computer, and named it HOA, Case Prep. Then I began saving every message, every notice, every little piece of arrogance they put in writing. By morning, I had a plan forming, calm, deliberate, precise, because silence isn't weakness. It's the sound strategy makes before it speaks. Within a week, the whispers began. Neighbors who once waved now looked away. The HOA group chat filled with phrases like neighborhood harmony and rules apply to everyone. It was their polite way of siding with Franklin. Then came the second letter. A colder one. Notice of continued non-compliance. Further disregard for community. Guidelines will result in temporary suspension of access to shared facilities. They were threatening to ban my son from the playground for wearing medical equipment. Grace read the letter twice, her lips trembling. "Daniel, please, let's not turn this into a war. I can't stand seeing him hurt again." I looked at Noah, sitting on the couch, staring at his silent tablet. He'd muted the sound himself. The little light on his hearing aid blinked weakly, like it was fading along with his confidence. That was the moment I realized we weren't fighting a rule. We were fighting humiliation, crafted by people who hid cruelty behind procedure. At school, Noah's teacher pulled me aside. "He asked if he could take his hearing aids off during recess," she said softly. "He told me some kids said they make him look like a robot." Those words sank into me like stones. When I got home, I saw the HOA meeting flyer taped to our mailbox. Monthly board review, attendance encouraged. I smiled faintly. They had no idea I was planning to attend. That evening, I began my quiet campaign. I reached out to a few residents, people I'd helped with small tech issues, the ones who'd seen Franklin's arrogance before. One of them, Mrs. Grant, whispered, "You're not the first family he's targeted. He fined a man last year for installing a wheelchair ramp. I asked her for the records, dates, messages, receipts. She gave me everything. Grace saw the determination in my eyes that night. "You're not just fighting for us, are you?" she said. "No," I replied, folding the documents neatly into a file. "I'm fighting for anyone who's ever been told their difference was a disturbance." Outside, the streetlights flickered across our porch, reflecting off the faint blue pulse behind Noah's ear. They called it a distraction. I called it a reminder, because sometimes the smallest light exposes the darkest corners. Franklin thought I was just another parent, quiet, compliant, the kind who avoided conflict to keep the peace. He had no idea who I really was. For the past 12 years, I'd worked as an ADA compliance engineer for corporate infrastructure. My entire career revolved around accessibility, making sure buildings, websites, and communities followed federal law protecting people with disabilities. I trained companies on the very regulations Franklin's HOA had just violated. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Anger is emotional. Focus is lethal. That night after Noah went to bed, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Maplewood Estates bylaws, a 42-page PDF filled with vague phrases like aesthetic, uniformity, and neighborhood cohesion. Buried inside was a single clause that caught my attention. All community standards remain subject to federal and state laws. That line was my doorway. I began collecting evidence like clockwork. Every text message, every recorded meeting, every email signed by Franklin or the HOA secretary. Grace helped me catalog them chronologically. We created folders labeled discrimination, medical documentation, and official notices. Then, I called an old colleague, Elise Carter, an ADA attorney who'd helped me audit public housing projects years ago. She didn't even let me finish before she said, "Daniel, this isn't a violation. This is a lawsuit." Over the next few days, she drafted a formal complaint under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, citing unlawful restriction of assistive devices in public accommodations. Franklin's flashing lights comment was now evidence of intentional harassment. Still, I didn't send the complaint immediately. I wanted to let them reveal more, to see how far ignorance could go when it dressed itself as authority. At the next HOA meeting, I sat quietly at the back, notebook in hand. Franklin spoke about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics again, and I recorded every word. When he mocked parents who use sympathy to win exceptions, I didn't flinch. I just noted the timestamp. After the meeting, Mrs. Clark, the HOA president, approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Brooks, you understand we're just trying to maintain standards." "Nothing personal," I nodded politely. "Of course. I'm all for standards, as long as they're legal." Her expression stiffened, but she didn't respond. Back home, I opened my folder, added the recording, and whispered to myself, "You wanted silence. I'll give you sound, in surround, because soon their little neighborhood rulebook would collide with federal law. And when that happened, the same people who mocked my son's flashing lights would be blinded by the spotlight of their own ignorance. The plan was no longer about revenge. It was about restoration, of dignity, of principle, of the right for a child to exist without apology, and in the calm of my study, the blue glow from Noah's hearing aids reflected faintly on the wall, like a lighthouse signaling that justice was on its way. After that night, everything in me shifted from emotion to execution. Justice doesn't start with anger. It starts with order. I created a private timeline on my office wall, printed emails, HOA bylaws, witness statements, medical certificates. Each item pinned in chronological sequence, like a silent storyboard of arrogance. The plan was surgical, calm, legal, impossible to dismiss. Step 1. Collect witnesses. I visited Mrs. Grant and the Sharmas again, neighbors who had faced their own HOA harassment. They agreed to provide written statements. Mrs. Grant's ramp fine and the HOA's recorded remarks about unsightly installations were now additional evidence of disability discrimination. Step 2. Build external pressure. Elise contacted the State Office for Civil Rights, attaching our compiled documentation. They issued a formal notification of investigation to the Maplewood HOA within 10 days. Step 3. Strategic setup. I asked the HOA president for permission to present an accessibility awareness update at the next open board meeting. The phrasing was polite, neutral, impossible to refuse. Franklin himself approved the slot, probably thinking I was going to apologize. Behind the scenes, I worked on my visual presentation, and not a PowerPoint of arguments, but of proof. Video snippets from the playground camera, showing him shouting at Noah. Audio from the meeting, where he mocked parents who weaponize sympathy. Screenshots of group messages dismissing disability concerns as drama. Every piece of data was time-stamped, cross-verified, and perfectly legal to use. Grace watched me from the hallway one night as I reviewed my slides. "You're not even angry anymore," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. "That's because anger ends too soon. I want this to last." Step 4, silent exposure. 2 days before the meeting, Elise filed the full ADA complaint with the state. Franklin and the HOA board received the notice that same morning. But the timing was deliberate. They'd read it minutes before my scheduled presentation. By then it would be too late to hide. The final touch was poetic. I bought a small, clear earpiece, a replica of Noah's hearing aid, and placed it in a velvet case. It would be my closing symbol, the same way his blinking light had started it all. As I rehearsed my statement, I imagined Franklin's expression when he realized what the blue light truly meant. Not decoration, not defiance, connection, and in that thought, I found calm, the kind that comes when you know the storm is ready, but you're holding the lightning in your hand. When the night of the meeting arrived, the boardroom lights gleamed against polished wood and folded arms. I placed the velvet case in my pocket and whispered to myself, "They silenced my son. Now they'll hear me, loud and clear." The meeting room was full that evening. Folding chairs lined the walls, the air thick with tension and the faint scent of disinfectant. Every board member was present. Franklin sat at the center, his red polo perfectly pressed, his clipboard resting like a badge of superiority. I walked in calmly, holding a slim laptop bag. Grace followed quietly, Noah at home with Mrs. Grant. She didn't want him to see this part. Mrs. Clark, the HOA president, opened the meeting. "Mr. Brooks, you've requested time to discuss accessibility concerns?" "Yes," I said, "and to share a demonstration." I connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide showed a playground, bright daylight, laughter, and then Franklin's voice echoing, "Turn those flashy things off." "They're blinding!" Gasps rippled across the room. Franklin's face tightened. "What is this?" "Public footage from Maplewood Park security cameras," I said. "Obtained legally under open records request. Time-stamped and unedited." The next clip rolled. A group chat screenshot with his messages highlighted. "Parents like the Brooks are milking sympathy." That kid's gear is a distraction. I didn't raise my voice once. I simply turned to the audience, 30 residents, many of them parents. I was told my son's hearing aids were against community standards, that his blue lights didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. I clicked to the next slide. A copy of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title III, Section 302. "This clause," I said, "makes that demand not just unethical, but illegal." Murmurs filled the room. Franklin's face flushed deep red. He barked, "You can't accuse me of discrimination in a community meeting." I smiled softly. "I'm not accusing. I'm demonstrating the—" Final slide appeared, a letter from the state office for civil rights confirming that an official investigation had already begun. Mrs. Clark's hands trembled as she read it aloud. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet case. "This," I said, opening it to reveal the tiny replica hearing aid, "is what you called a distraction. To my son, it's the only way he's ever heard his mother's voice. It blinks when it connects to the world. A light that means sound." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "You tried to turn that light off." A few board members looked down. One woman in the back began to cry quietly. Franklin muttered, "You're twisting everything." "No," I interrupted softly, my voice calm but final. "You did that yourself." I closed the laptop. "I don't want revenge. I want recognition, that no child should ever feel ashamed for existing differently. The room erupted in quiet applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. Even Mrs. Clark joined in, eyes wet. Franklin stood frozen, trapped between fury and humiliation, and as I walked out, the reflection from the projector screen caught the side of my glasses, a small flicker of blue light glinting across the wall. For the first time, the same light he mocked had illuminated him. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing, not with gossip but with disbelief. Someone had recorded the meeting and uploaded it to the community Facebook group. Within hours, it had spread beyond Maplewood. The clip of Franklin shouting about flashing lights hit a nerve online. People weren't just angry. They were ashamed that this could happen in a modern, inclusive community. The HOA board called an emergency session that evening. I attended again, not to gloat, but to finish what I'd started. Grace came with me this time. She looked calm, the kind of calm that hides strength behind quiet eyes. When we entered, the atmosphere was heavy. Franklin was already there, face pale, hands shaking as he shuffled papers. Mrs. Clark looked exhausted. "Cameras from a local news outlet were waiting outside, Mr. Brooks," Mrs. Clark began softly. "We'd like to issue a statement of apology on behalf of the board." Franklin interrupted. "We don't need to turn this into a media circus. It was a misunderstanding." I turned toward him. "A misunderstanding doesn't come with written notices and fines, Franklin. It comes with apologies. You never gave one." He leaned forward, desperate. "You're trying to ruin my life over a light bulb." "You're twisting everything I said." I met his eyes. "No, Franklin. You did that yourself, when you turned a child's medical device into your inconvenience." Grace placed the audiologist's report on the table. "This is Noah's diagnosis," she said quietly. "Every flash means he can hear me say, 'I love you.' You wanted to take that away." The room fell silent. Even Franklin couldn't meet her gaze. Mrs. Clark cleared her throat. "The HOA has reviewed the complaint with our legal counsel. We have been informed that the restrictions placed on your family constitute an ADA violation." She paused, then continued, "Effective immediately. The HOA will issue a formal written apology, lift all notices, and establish new accessibility guidelines for Maplewood Estates. Mr. Hale has agreed to step down from his position." Franklin slammed his folder shut. "This is ridiculous. I built this neighborhood's standards," I replied evenly. "Then it's only fitting that you see what real standards look like." He stormed out. The door shut with a hollow thud, the kind of sound endings make when they know they're deserved. I stood, shook Mrs. Clark's hand, and said, "Thank you for choosing to listen." Outside, the evening air felt lighter. Neighbors gathered quietly, some clapping me on the shoulder, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner. I didn't hold it against them. Silence, after all, had been my own weapon too. As we walked home, Grace slipped her hand into mine. "Do you think he learned anything from this?" I looked toward the park, where the streetlights shimmered against the slide's metal rails. "Maybe," I said. "But even if he didn't, everyone else did. Because now, the whole community had seen it. The power of calm truth, standing taller than loud cruelty. And for once, the light that guided us wasn't just Noah's, it was everyone's." The HOA's apology letter arrived 2 weeks later, printed on heavy cream paper as if elegance could erase cruelty. It read, "We sincerely regret the misunderstanding." A polite phrase that meant we got caught. But I didn't need their words anymore. The real victory had already happened the day my son walked back into that park. The sun was low, streaks of orange spilling across the swings. Kids shouted, laughed, chased one another through sprinklers. And there was Noah, running toward the slide, hearing aides flashing softly in the golden light. For the first time in months, no one stared. No one whispered. In fact, one little girl pointed at his ears and said, "Cool lights! Can mine do that too?" Noah grinned, that full, open smile I hadn't seen since before the first notice arrived, and shouted back, "They help me hear you better." Grace stood beside me, tears glinting in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. I shook my head. "He did. He kept shining. Later that week, the HOA announced a new initiative, Accessibility Week at Maplewood Estates, workshops on inclusivity, flyers celebrating residents with disabilities. And right there on the first poster, a photograph of Noah smiling, blue lights glowing beside the caption, "Every light matters." Franklin's house was dark most nights after that. He'd resigned quietly and stopped attending meetings. Rumor said he'd moved to another neighborhood where no one knew his name. I didn't celebrate his downfall. True justice isn't about breaking someone. It's about making others whole again. Sometimes karma doesn't shout. It simply reflects. The same blinking lights that once drew mockery had become symbols of pride, printed across Maplewood's bulletin boards. One evening, as Noah fell asleep, I heard him mumble through the drowsy haze of dreams, "Dad, my lights make people happy now." I smiled and whispered, "They always did, buddy. They just had to learn to see it." Outside his window, a single porch light flickered faintly. One of those automatic bulbs Franklin had once insisted everyone match by color and wattage. Funny how those strict lights all looked the same. But my son's? His glowed with purpose. That night, the neighborhood finally slept under a kinder kind of light. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. The laughter from the park sounded brighter, the morning air felt lighter, and the silence, the same silence that used to sting, now felt peaceful again. Every day, when Noah woke up, he'd press the small button on his hearing aids, waiting for that tiny flash of blue. The moment it blinked, he'd whisper, "It's working," as if confirming the world was still there for him to hear. Sometimes I'd just watch him, standing by the window, smiling at birdsong, and realize that his courage had done something my words never could. It had made a whole community listen. Grace still teared up when she passed the new Accessibility Matters sign by the park gate. I'd squeeze her hand and remind her, we didn't start a fight, we started awareness. I'd spent my entire career teaching companies how to build access. But it took my own child to show me what access really meant. It's not just ramps or rules or blinking lights. It's dignity. It's inclusion. It's the space to exist without apology. The neighborhood still had its meetings, its rules, its fences. But now there was something bigger holding it together. Empathy. And sometimes, when the sun sets just right and the light hits Noah's ears, the reflections scatter across the grass like tiny blue stars. Each one a quiet reminder that kindness, once ignited, doesn't fade. It echoes. If someone mocked your child for something they couldn't control, for the very thing that helped them live, would you stay silent? Or stand your ground? Sometimes the smallest light exposes the deepest ignorance, and sometimes justice doesn't roar. It blinks softly, reminding the world to listen before it speaks. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if it were your child? And remember, silence protects cruelty, but truth protects the innocent. Subscribe for more true stories where calm hearts bring powerful justice.